Well, hello everybody out there. How are we all doing here? This is Bongo from the HOWL Wildlife Photography Convention. Welcome back to another HOWL live stream here. We've been doing a bunch of photo live streams lately, but today we have one of our HOWL keynote speakers. This is Christine Luckasavitch. Please everybody say hello to Christine. Christine, say hello to everybody out there.
Gwenny, hi everyone.
Amazing, yeah. And so, how do we begin here? So, I guess let's just start with just a summary introduction about yourself, where you're from, what you studied, and your current occupation.
All right. So, I studied English and History at Acadia University. Currently working on my master's of Indigenous Studies at Trent University, working to finish my thesis at the current moment. In my undergrad, it was Canadian English, and so really Canadian historical novel and Canadian history as well. So really deeply rooted in like Canadiana, right? Really celebrating all of that. But throughout that whole entire time, I only had one poem by an Indigenous person, my whole undergrad. Wonderful experience, but it was lacking something. So I waited about 10 years and decided to go back to school. But within that 10-year span, I had, a lot of work experience. Everything from working in the realm of, Indigenous politics to working for myself as a consultant, wanting to make sure that I'm really having an impact on community. And also was the executive director at Native Land Digital, so the organization behind Native Land, so the online Indigenous territory, language, and treaty map of the world.
Which is a really cool website.
It's a really cool website in there to help people to understand whose land they're on and really from there learn what responsibilities they have when they're on that land.
And you can use that worldwide?
Worldwide, so if it's not full yet, like if there's a place that say the map is blank, it's not because there's not Indigenous people there, it's because we just didn't get to it yet.
Right.
So worldwide, and all with input from community. So really it allows community a chance to have full say over how they're represented in the world. Very
cool. And the URL one more time?
So native-land.ca.
native-land.ca. Yeah. That's amazing. And at what point in your life did you decide to dedicate your career to Indigenous studies and education?
I remember like being fairly young, being a teenager and kind of thinking, what do I want to do? And the only thing I could really come up with was like, I want the opportunity to help people in some way. And over the years of like learning more and more about who I am as an Indigenous person, I knew that there was something that I could do to help my community, but more so to help youth in the community to kind of know their stories, know who they are, and know a little bit more about the land that's here as well, and kind of those places that we've always been and where we would harvest or where we've left kind of that writing on stone. So really in an effort to help community, I don't know when it sort of happened, but it just sort of kind of made sense. It was, I kind of put my trust in the world that I would end up where I needed to be, and that's how I got here.
Very cool, very cool. And we still have a long way to go with truth and reconciliation. Can you share any success stories that you've experienced firsthand?
Yeah. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. As far as success stories and it being like, everything is nice and wrapped up in a tiny little bow, that I haven't necessarily experienced yet. Not to the point where it can be something that's like a fully finished product or project, I should say. But really, like, the success stories are more and more people taking up the responsibilities. So working with a lot of schools, working with summer camps in Algonquin Park, seeing the changes that have been made over the last couple of years, looking at incorporating Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous knowledge keepers into programming, that's a really good step, and sort of like land acknowledgements are the first step.
Yeah.
Let's keep going with that. Let's find ways to develop relationships with community. Let's find ways to listen a little bit more. And then when you're listening, you're learning, and then actually turning that learning into action, right? And what ways can then you also have an impact on community, a positive impact, and contribute to Indigenous well-being, that's actually what's needed by the community.
Indigenous well-being. I love that phrase. And that was actually my follow-up question for that was, upon having a land acknowledgement, what's next? And I mean, I think you just totally answered my question right there. So
with land acknowledgements, I mean, it's something that so many people are curious about, things that people are wanting to do. It's something that's expected, right? It's something that you expect to hear at the beginning of events and games or whatever it might be. But, if you read it off of a script, doesn't really mean anything. Go off script, kind of have that organic flow, but make sure that it comes from here always. And I think, good to have it, but if there's no action that's associated, if there's no change that's associated, like there should be a commitment in there of what you're going to do, as well as a recognition of the steps and what you're doing and how you're changing and so on. And land acknowledgement should always evolve too. They don't kind of remain the way that you first wrote them, because your understanding and your learning is evolving as well. So continue to move it around. Like, make sure you do what feels good. Make sure you do what feels right.
Yeah. Awesome. Many people, such as myself, absolutely love Algonquin Park. It's a magical place for me and many others. But despite that, only within the last 3 to 5 years, I've begun to really understand and learn how the creation of the park resulted in the displacement of your ancestors, the Algonquins, your people, and other nations as well too. How do you suggest we reconcile these feelings of Algonquin Park being such a beloved place, but its history mired in brutal colonialism?
I mean, Algonquin's special, right? Algonquin is a place that so many people love so much, and for good reason. It's a place that's very special to my heart as well, and one that, there's a lot of history that's there to be celebrated, certainly, and a lot of really incredible people, like Tom Thompson. Tom Thompson was here. So I don't want to necessarily just wipe that away.
Of course.
So alongside of that celebration, there also has to be a recognition that there's a more full story that has not really been told.
Right.
Actually, I'll take that back. It's not that it hasn't been told, it's that it hasn't always been heard.
Right.
And so from that, in what ways can we create space for those more full histories? In what ways can we make sure that we're honoring people who've always been here on this land, who know this land or who have that ancestral connection to here? And of course, with the creation of Algonquin Park, because we were displaced, and as a result, community fractured, nation fracture, and so on, we're still healing as well too. So in what ways can visitors to Algonquin Park, as well as folks who work there, surrounding communities, in what ways can they also kind of support us as we're kind of coming back to who we've always been? But also wanting to recognize, too, not just Algonquin folks who call Algonquin Park, or what's now Algonquin Park, home, but you've also got Nipissing to the north, and you've got Chippewa, and you've got Mississauga as well, too. So I think it's really significant to also make sure that we're honoring those folks as well, and inviting them into the table in really big and meaningful ways. This is shared territory, always has been. So I would say that folks being in Algonquin, and whether management or folks working there, whether it's visitors as well too, in what ways are you recognizing all of those nations, right? And in what ways are you honoring those nations and making sure that they're invited in?
Awesome. And right now, the European settler narrative dominates a lot of the historical content associated with Algonquin Park. And as I understand, part of your mission is to bring Indigenous history of Algonquin Park back to the forefront, where it rightfully belongs. As you said earlier, we aren't hearing it necessarily. Why is it so important for us to learn more about Indigenous history?
I mean, in that sort of era, Canada's era of truth and reconciliation, it's not an Indigenous responsibility to reconcile. We don't have anything to reconcile for. Our role is to, share stories if we're comfortable. But beyond that, I mean, we want to focus on community, right? We want to focus on families, and we want to focus on land and the relationships that we have. But for settlers and visitors here, there's a responsibility there to really understand sort of what that bigger story is. And I forgot the other half of the question.
The other half of the question was, why is it important for us to learn more about Indigenous history?
I mean, especially because the histories that we've been told and sort of spoon-fed in our textbooks and all of that stuff, they're inaccurate. They're not coming directly from us. So with any of our stories, you need to hear it directly from us. You need to read books that Indigenous authors have written. You need to listen to Indigenous folks, like when they are talking about their experiences, so that you actually understand what that experience is like. For literally anyone who will listen, I will always recommend My Conversations with Canadians by Lee Miracle. That's a really good book to start with, to kind of understand that whole broad scope of the impact of colonialism on Indigenous peoples and what's now known as Canada. And just yesterday I finished a book called They Call Me Number One by Bev Sellers. And to get an understanding of residential school experience, listening to those survivors of residential school and the stories coming from them and just what they've experienced and the impacts on their families, that's how you'll start to kind of understand the depths of those impacts and why it's generational. Very much, the same here in my own family story is that we've experienced quite a bit due to sort of forced relocation, due to kind of, we've lost language in a lot of cases. We've lost knowledge in a lot of cases. And so listening to kind of the causes of why we've lost that's not our fault. So from there, then we're able to sort of heal together. I think overall, I mean, my thought is, now we're here sharing this space. We're neighbors. Let's make sure that everything that we do together is for the future of all of us, for all of those next generations. So really, I think it's important to listen to those stories so that we're able to heal and so that we're able to be in good relation with each other.
Wonderful. Wildlife photography, I would argue, is probably the most popular form of artistic expression involving wild animals today. There's so many wildlife photographers that visit Algonquin. They now vastly outnumber painters. I know back maybe 30, 40 years ago with the group of 7, all that hype, everybody was painting outside. But now everybody's got a DSLR camera, and so that's like the one artistic thing with animals now. But traditionally, how did Algonquin people and other Indigenous people that inhabited this area, how did they artistically express their relationship with wild animals?
And so I don't want to speak for, anyone other than kind of my own understanding,
Sure.
Any other nations.
Yeah.
So to the best of my knowledge, I would consider it kind of artistic, but then also like things like pictographs and petroglyphs.
Yeah.
Though they are, like they're painting or they're writing on stone. They are, I would say, an artistic expression, but they go far beyond that. Like those are our sacred spaces. So we know that those images exist, but going beyond that now and seeing how many like really incredible contemporary Indigenous painters, Indigenous artists, whether it be, photographers, graphic artists, and so on, and just the ways that we are learning to sort of share our expression of those relationships between us and, say, animals that we have a special connection to, it's quite substantial, right? To see these really incredible new art forms that are sort of emerging. Like there's Note in Studio, who have, kind of that XR experience of being able to see this artistic form of, a bear or whatever the animal might be, like being able to interact with that. So I think, as far as that sort of artistic relationship in the past, I'm not entirely sure, but I can speak to it, a little bit at least, like in honoring, a lot of painters and so on, Indigenous artists who are working now, and just really celebrate the beauty that they've got in the world. But then, I think it's important to also recognize too, like we've had these long-standing relationships with animals,
right?
That has gone back, since the beginning of time,
right?
Or at least time as we know it.
Right.
As Anishinaabe people, we know we've been here since time immemorial. We've been
right.
here since the very beginning of time, since before the very beginning of time. And so the reason that we're here, the reason we've been able to survive here as well as thrive here, is because we've had those relationships with animals who have agreed to, enter into relationships with us. But those relationships, it's not always like a take sort of thing that we're used to doing now. But it's always reciprocal. There's certain protocols that we have before we harvest an animal in order to feed our family. And there are certain relationships that we hold with particular animals for particular reasons. And so, even acknowledging their presence and taking, talk a lot about taking a moment to just, if you see an animal or you're having, if you're having a moment where, the thing that's popping into my mind right now is, I was out, we were tracking wolves one day, and it was like first snowfall, and the person I was with was like fumbling for his camera. But instead of fumbling with the camera and missing the whole entire moment of it was this incredible, seeing a wolf howl just into this open space with his mouth kind of wide open. Instead of fumbling for a camera, I sat there watching.
Yeah. Right?
So if you're able to kind of take that moment and have that sort of connected moment where you're not preoccupied with seeing things through a lens, that connection goes a little bit deeper, I think.
Yeah.
And so just this past weekend, I was in Nova Scotia for work. So following the hurricane, we were at the coast. I was busy taking out pictures, with my camera and whatnot, and then I thought, hold on for a second. I need to take a moment to appreciate the power of the water and the way that it's been influenced by the storm system, and just watch kind of the power and the beauty of those waves, hitting the shoreline, rather than looking at it through a screen. So I think, I don't know, and I know going a little bit offside here, but with photographers, make sure that you're also taking a moment to not look through the screen always, right? Have a moment to connect, and maybe just also sort of ask that question too of what does that animal think of having its photo taken? What are you taking from that animal too? What are those ethical considerations? And is that something what are the ethical considerations around, say, a photographer profiting off of an animal image? What are you giving back to that animal?
Yeah. And that's exactly why I asked that question. I think you answered it so great, and especially when you said when there's just a take relationship, which I find kind of a lot of wildlife photographers might be tempted to fall into that frame of mind, because it's all about, especially now with social media, it's all about impressing all of your peers online. And throughout HOWL, we always remind people that it's even if you go out into the field and you go on your hike and you don't see anything at all, there's still so much that you're seeing. But some people are it's like they missed the point. It's I didn't see the wolf, I didn't see the moose. It was not a successful trip, right? And so really a lot of what we're trying to do is to get people to look beyond that, right? And also the whole ethical thing of profiting off the images of animals and things like that. So yeah, part of what we're really curious about is there anything in the Indigenous traditions that we can learn from to be better artists, really, and more respectful artists, right? So,
I think it's really about those relationships, really wanting to make sure that you have a relationship there that's respect-based. How are you making sure that you're giving back? How are you making sure that you're it's all about taking those moments to kind of recognize that, your presence does have an impact, whether positive or negative. So always wanting to make sure then that, you're conscious of that, and in what ways can you, and what makes sense to you as an individual, can you mitigate your impact when you're out there. But I think overall, just for human well-being, get outside without the distractions, put down the stuff, go outside. It's something that I always have to think hard about is can I leave my phone at home when I'm out for a walk? God forbid I leave that thing at home. 'Cause I might, miss a really cool photo. But getting into that practice of just kind of being, you don't always have to try to catch, that perfect shot of a moose or whatever it might be, but really appreciate being in that moment, being outside and being surrounded by so much beauty, so much life, so much vibrancy, but really being surrounded by relations. You know, that understanding that as humans, we're not separate from or above, right? Like we're part of that world too. We're not just kind of zooming in and zooming out, but really we need to be conscious that our presence does have impact, and can we make it a good one?
Yeah, I love that. The way you've worded that is just fantastic. Which is a great segue into my next question here. How do we, and maybe you've partially answered this a little bit, but I'm going to ask this question anyways because it's on my list here. How do we become more ethical photographers by learning more about the Indigenous history of Algonquin people and perhaps the colonialism behind the creation of Algonquin Park and other, not just Algonquin, but all of the other national parks and parks around the world?
I think like no matter where you go, you're on Indigenous lands.
Yeah.
And because of that, you do need to be conscious of kind of what's your impact on those lands. Whenever, you know, something that you kind of get in the practice of through using native land, I would say, you know, you can find out whose land you're on. You can find out whose land you're on. You can find out about that colonial history. Like, you know, we're telling those stories. Those stories are out there. So find out what the history of that land is. Find out why those parks are created. Find out why those parks have impact on Indigenous peoples who are there. Find out why those parks have displaced Indigenous peoples there. Again, there are those full histories that we don't often talk about. And really that whole, like, you know, national parks, provincial parks, or whatever they might be, the creation of those wilderness spaces, like, those spaces aren't wild. They've never been wild. Like, wilderness is a construct that we've kind of taught ourselves to be enamored with or be scared of as well, too. So there's that need to also tame that wilderness as well. But I think, you know, being conscious of really who you are in that really holistic way. Like, you know, you are a person worth celebrating on Indigenous lands as well. Like, your presence, it's not unwelcome there, but how are you giving back to land? Right? How are you giving back again to those animals? How are you giving back to those Indigenous nations? Are you supporting Indigenous businesses? Are you paying reparations in some way that then go to benefit Indigenous communities, no matter where you are? But really, ultimately, you know, as people who travel or who might visit these wilderness spaces, like, there's a responsibility there to know that you're on Indigenous lands and really to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. I love everything that you just said. that was great. And yeah, like I've said many times throughout our live streams that we've been doing, is that we're really trying hard to build a community of ethically minded photographers, conscious photographers as well, because sometimes the wildlife photographers bother the naturalists and the scientists and maybe even Indigenous people too, because they're just trampling around all of the wilderness, and you know, there's the stereotype that all they care about is the money shot, and they just want to impress the peers and cash in the magazines and that kind of thing. So yeah, you know, everything that you just said there, I think will really help a lot of our attendees become more mindful. And through that, and just act more ethically when they're out in the field as well. So that's I love everything that you just said, and it makes me super excited for your keynote presentation. So Christine will be speaking on Christine's keynote presentation will be on Sunday, November 5th, and you will also be giving 2 guided walks as well in the mornings. Did you want to maybe, we've got about 5 minutes, did you maybe just give us a little bit of a preview of what somebody might be able to expect on one of your guided walks?
Mm-hmm. So the way that I kind of roll, you know, whether it's with this, whether it's whenever I'm out on the land with folks too, is just, let's go out there together, you know, in a really good way, in community with each other, and let's sort of see what we can see. Let's stop if we see a cool plant. Like, let's stop if we see this. Let's stop if we see that. And let's just kind of, like, you know, roll off of each other and riff off of each other. Like, for folks who are joining, what do you want to know? Right? What do you want to know? What do you want to talk about? We can talk about history. We can talk about plants. We can talk about animals. We can talk about, I don't know, whatever you kind of want, right?
Yeah.
And I think too, like, though I do focus a lot, of course, on the Indigenous history of this area, as well. You know, I spent a lot of my life sort of geeking out about Algonquin Park history as a whole. So whether, you know, you want to talk about Tom Thompson, whether you want to talk about old lake or place names, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, let's sort of, I don't know, let's shape this around what people want to know about, and just, again, like, let's riff off of each other.
Yeah. Fantastic. And that's exactly the kind of guided hike experience that we want our attendees to be able to experience. So that just sounds fantastic. Awesome. All right. And I've gone through all my questions here, and I know that you're very busy. You're one of the busiest people that I know, but it's because you're so knowledgeable and you're doing such amazing work. So thank you for agreeing to participate with HOWL. We are absolutely excited to have you. And yeah, we've definitely listened to a lot of what you've spoken about at the various, you've given a few workshops here in Whitney even about this very subject, and a lot of that information has resonated with us. So we're making a conscious effort to involve more Indigenous businesses and or artists, and this is where it starts, and we're going to keep at it so that we can go through the journey and try to do what's right, and because I feel like I'm going off here a bit, but anyways, yeah. I don't know if there's any other parting thoughts that you want to drop here as well.
Just like, you know, when I want to always mention to folks that, you know, this work is ongoing, right? It's something
ongoing.
Like, start with something small. Start with something that, like, makes sense to you. Start with something that, like, is of interest to you, and then just keep going, right? It's a lifelong learning process for all of us.
That's right. I always say that to be a lifelong learner, I think, like, that's like the best personality type to have, because if there's anybody that's perfect, they're problematic. You got to stay humble, right? Yeah. All right. Oh, Richard is out there watching. Richard, oh, we love you, Richard. Thanks for tuning in. I don't think Richard's ever missed a stream, but Richard says, sounds awesome. Great. And Richard will also be attending. So
wonderful. Looking forward to meeting you, Richard.
All right, everybody, you take care. Thanks again for tuning in. And again, yes, HOWL, November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2023. Tickets are still available. Please check out howlphotocon.com. And Richard says, me too as well. Amazing. All right. See you later, everybody.
Bye. Bye.